My son said, "You're a mental patient, Dad." The words came out like a bullet, sharp, loud, and meant to wound. He said it in front of everyone, right in the middle of the lobby where my employees stood frozen with coffee cups halfway to their lips. I heard the laughter from 2 interns die out mid-chuckle. Even the receptionist, who'd been typing non-stop, stopped her fingers on the keyboard. The sound of silence filled the room heavier than any noise could. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just looked at him, my own son standing there in a pressed navy suit, shoes shining brighter than his respect for me. He thought he looked like a man. To me, he looked like a storm that had forgotten where it came from. I smiled. Not out of joy, out of understanding. Age gives you that gift. When you've lived long enough, you recognize pain hiding behind arrogance. He smirked back, thinking I was too weak, too old to answer. "See?" he said, waving at my staff. "He just smiles. He doesn't even know where he is half the time." Someone cleared their throat. Another person looked away. Shame filled the air like smoke. I adjusted my glasses and turned toward the hallway. "Get back to work," I said softly. They did, because they knew who really ran this building. My son didn't. He had forgotten. Or maybe he'd never known. He thought the company that bore our last name had somehow outgrown me, that the new offices, new branding, and younger managers meant I'd faded into the background, but every paycheck in this place still carried my signature. Every decision still went through my desk. Every person here had eaten because of the foundation I built. I walked past him, slow and steady. His cologne filled the air, expensive, loud, like he needed the world to know he could afford it. He muttered something under his breath as I passed. I didn't catch it. Or maybe I just didn't care to. Back in my office, I closed the door. The city stretched outside my window. Atlanta at dusk, golden gray. Cars moved like veins of light through the streets. Somewhere in that maze, my son was leaving, proud of what he thought he'd done. I sat down in my leather chair, the same one I'd used for 20 years. The smell of old books and coffee clung to the room. On the shelf sat framed awards: Entrepreneur of the Year, Community Builder, Father of the Decade, titles that once meant something. Now they felt like echoes. On my desk was a stack of papers I hadn't touched in days. But under them, hidden between folders, was an old photograph. My wife's smile. My boy's small hands gripping a wooden toy truck we'd built together one summer. We were happy then. Back when respect didn't need to be earned, it was just given naturally between blood. I traced my thumb over the glass. It was cracked from the corner. He'd dropped it once when he was little, and I never replaced it. That tiny fracture had become part of the picture, just like pain had become part of our family. The phone on my desk buzzed. It was Daniel, my chief of operations. He hesitated before speaking. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to say, you handled that well." "We're all sorry about what he said." I didn't answer for a while. Then I said, "A father's dignity doesn't depend on his son's words." He didn't know how to reply. He just whispered, "Yes, sir," and hung up. I leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the hum of the city below. Maybe this was what aging felt like. Not weakness, not confusion, but clarity. When you've seen everything, insults lose their edge. They just show you who someone really is. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain started tapping against my window, steady and rhythmic, like the city had its own heartbeat. I got up, made myself tea, and stared at the reflection in the glass. The face staring back at me had lines carved deep from decades of trying to be everything: a provider, a husband, a leader, a father. Now I was being called insane by the one person I'd built it all for. I smiled at the irony. Life had a way of bringing circles back to their start. Once I'd called my own father stubborn. He hadn't answered me either. He just looked at me the same way I looked at my son today, with quiet disappointment and love buried beneath restraint. A week passed. I didn't hear from him. Not a call, not a message. I assumed he was off somewhere enjoying his small victories, telling his friends how he put the old man in his place. Then one morning, I walked into my office, and my assistant handed me a folder. She said, "New applicants for the junior analyst position." I nodded and flipped through the pages absent-mindedly until I stopped on one name. His name. My son. The resume was short, unimpressive, and desperate. He had no idea who the hiring manager was. He had no idea whose desk this folder would land on. For a long minute I just stared at that page. The rain outside returned, light and gentle. I let out a breath that felt like years leaving my chest. Fate had brought him right back to the door he slammed on me. And I didn't have to do a single thing. I closed the folder carefully, placed it on the corner of my desk and smiled to myself. This time, I whispered, Lesson 1 begins. When I closed that folder, I didn't feel anger. I felt something far deeper, the strange calm that comes right before justice starts to move on its own. I placed his resume on the far corner of my desk. Didn't toss it away. Didn't sign it either. Just left it there. Sometimes silence is a better teacher than punishment. The next morning, HR called my office. Sir, about the new candidate. Should we schedule an interview? I said, yes, schedule it. Follow every standard procedure. Don't skip a step. They didn't need to know that the candidate was my son. I watched from my glass office as the staff bustled around, preparing for the interviews. He arrived just before noon, confident as ever. I saw him step into the lobby holding a portfolio, wearing the same arrogance like cologne. The security guard greeted him politely. He barely nodded back. That was my boy. Always mistaking courtesy for weakness, he didn't see me. The glass tint on my office windows hid me perfectly. I could observe everything. He walked to the reception desk, flashing that smile he used to use when he wanted something. I remembered that smile from when he was little. It used to melt me. Now it just reminded me how distance grows between love and pride. He sat in the waiting area. I could see him tapping his foot impatiently. The same impatience that once made him quit 3 jobs in a row because the managers were too slow. He thought ambition was louder than discipline. The first interviewer, Maya, came to greet him. She was young but sharp, one of the best I'd trained personally. I told her nothing. She didn't know who he was. She took him to the small glass conference room. From where I sat, I could see everything. No sound, just movement. His gestures, her nods, the subtle changes in body language. He leaned back too far, crossed his arms when she asked about teamwork, laughed when she mentioned deadlines. Maya's face didn't change. Professional, calm, focused. I smiled faintly. Good. She'd learned well. Halfway through the interview, I could see the confidence draining from his posture. His smile faded. His eyes dropped. He started realizing that charm doesn't replace experience, and attitude doesn't equal ability. When the interview ended, he shook her hand without meeting her eyes. He walked out slower than he came in. But before he reached the elevator, Maya stopped him. Sir, she said, please wait in the lobby. The director might want to speak with you. Director. That was me. He turned around instantly. His spine straightened. He nodded politely, maybe for the first time that day. He sat down again, this time quieter, legs still. I waited 5 minutes, 10, 15. Then I opened my office door and stepped out. The sound of my shoes on the marble floor was enough to make half the room stand. When I passed, employees greeted me softly. Good afternoon, Mr. Harris. He froze. He hadn't expected me to appear from that hallway. When our eyes met, I saw panic flicker behind his calm. He stood up slowly, trying to smile, but his lips trembled. Dad, he said under his breath. I nodded once, then turned to the receptionist and said, please send the applicant to my office. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. He followed me inside. The door closed behind us with a heavy click. For a moment there was only silence, that same silence from the day he insulted me, except this time it was heavier. He spoke first. Dad, I didn't know this was your company. I looked at him, studying the nervous twitch in his jaw. You didn't know, I said softly. You didn't ask. He looked down. I just needed a job. Things have been tough. I let the words hang. Pride always sounds softer when it's cracked. I see, I said, walking to my desk. And when you insulted me last week in front of my employees, was that part of your plan? He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. His voice came out small. I didn't mean it. I turned the folder toward him. His resume sat on top. Is this what you're offering the world now? I asked, half effort and excuses. He tried to meet my gaze, but shame kept pulling his head down. I'm trying to start over, he said. Please, Dad. That word, please, it hit differently. It wasn't angry, wasn't sarcastic. It was raw. For the first time in years, he wasn't speaking like a child pretending to be a man. He was just my son again. I let the silence stretch until he couldn't take it anymore. He whispered, "Can I have another chance?" I studied him for a long moment. Then I said, "That's not up to me anymore. It's up to your work. You'll start where every new employee starts. No special treatment, no titles. Just work." He nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, Dad. I won't disappoint you." I leaned back. "Don't thank me yet," I said quietly. "You'll report to Maya. She'll decide if you belong here." His eyes widened again, the humiliation sank in, being trained by someone he probably thought beneath him, but he nodded anyway. Understood. He left my office, slower this time, and for the first time I saw a hint of humility in his walk. When the door closed, I exhaled. It wasn't victory I felt. It was peace, the kind that comes when the truth starts its quiet work. The next morning when I entered the building, he was already there. Early, wearing a different suit, wrinkled but neat. Carrying a notebook instead of a phone, he greeted the guard this time. Even smiled. From my office window I watched him file papers, take notes, listen. He was learning the very thing he once mocked. The weight of responsibility, and I whispered to myself, "Now, son, let's see if you can handle the world you thought you already owned." Days turned into weeks. The office rhythm didn't stop for anyone, not even my son. And I made sure of that. I didn't speak to him directly again. Not a word. He was just another employee now, clocking in, clocking out, learning what real work felt like. He wasn't treated badly, but he wasn't treated like the boss's son either. No one even knew he was. Maya kept her professionalism. She guided him like any trainee, direct, firm, and unbending. At first, I could see the frustration in his posture. He was used to being the loudest person in the room, the one who thought he already knew everything. But in that office, his voice meant nothing. Only his actions did. Every morning I arrived early. I'd see him outside the building, sometimes standing near the entrance, clutching his coffee cup, eyes still heavy with doubt. It took time for the arrogance to fade. It took longer for humility to grow. But slowly I saw it, piece by piece. He began to listen more, to speak less, to write things down instead of assuming. Once, during a meeting, I watched from behind the tinted glass as Maya presented a report. She asked him for data verification. He fumbled, made an error, and the room grew quiet. Everyone looked at him. The old version of him would have lashed out, blamed someone else. But this time he took a breath and said, "I made a mistake. I'll fix it before end of day." I smiled, and just a little. That was the first crack of maturity breaking through the wall of ego. After that day, something shifted. He stayed late, double-checking reports, shadowing Maya, asking her questions. Sometimes I saw him reading old company manuals in the cafeteria, long after everyone else had gone home. That same cafeteria where he once mocked the janitor's uniform. Now he ate quietly, seated next to the very man he used to laugh at. The janitor, Mr. Cole, told me one morning, "Your new hire. He's respectful. Helps me clean up before he leaves." I just nodded. My chest tightened a little. Not with pride and not yet, but with something like hope. Still, I didn't interfere. The lesson wasn't finished. And deep inside, I knew the real test was coming, because every man who falls must face the mirror before he can rise. One Thursday afternoon, our company received a massive project proposal, worth millions. It required complete financial documentation, quick turnaround, and flawless reporting. I assigned Maya as lead analyst. And to her team, I added him. He didn't expect it. When the list came out, I saw him freeze in the hallway, eyes scanning his name. He didn't look toward my office, but I knew he felt my gaze. He straightened his shoulders and nodded to himself, whispering something under his breath. Probably a prayer, or maybe just determination. For 2 weeks straight, the team worked like a machine. Late nights, early mornings, take-out boxes and coffee cups stacking in corners. Maya handled the pressure with quiet precision. He followed her lead, doing grunt work without complaint. But on the last night and the night before the final presentation, disaster struck. A system glitch erased half the compiled data. I was at home when the call came in. Panic in Maya's voice. "Sir, we might lose the contract." I arrived at the office past midnight. The team looked exhausted. Tension filled the room like smoke. He sat at the far end typing furiously, eyes red from staring at the screen. When he saw me enter, he stood instantly. Dad, sir, we're fixing it. I can recover the lost files. Maya turned to me, surprised. Sir, he's been here since evening. Refused to leave. I walked over quietly, looked at his trembling hands over the keyboard. Sweat glistened on his forehead. There was no arrogance left in his face, just pure focus and guilt. Hours passed. The team dwindled down one by one, but he stayed. By dawn, the screen finally lit up with restored files. Every number, every document intact. He didn't cheer, didn't brag. He just leaned back, rubbed his face, and whispered, "Thank God." Maya clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You saved us." He shook his head. "No, I just fixed my mistake." Those words struck me harder than anything he'd ever said before. Later that morning, the client arrived. We presented everything perfectly. They signed the deal before noon. When the room erupted in applause, I caught sight of him, sitting in the back, smiling quietly, no longer trying to be the center of attention. I motioned for him to follow me to my office. Inside, the air felt heavy again, just like that first day. But this time it was different. He stood straighter. He looked me in the eye. "You did good work," I said finally. He nodded. "Thank you, sir." I paused, then added softly, "You don't have to call me sir here." He blinked fast, his throat tightening. "I don't deserve to call you Dad yet," he whispered. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Keep working the way you did last night. Let your actions earn back what your words broke." He nodded again, but this time his voice didn't shake. "Yes, sir. I will." As he turned to leave, I noticed something in his walk, not pride, not shame. It was humility wrapped in quiet strength. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself, maybe he's starting to understand what being a man really means. But deep inside, I also knew the biggest storm was still coming. He had learned to respect work. Now he would have to face the one thing he feared most, the truth about himself. And I was going to let life, not words, deliver that lesson. The office had a strange quiet that morning. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it knows something you don't. I walked in as I always did, calm, unnoticed, invisible in my own empire. He didn't see me pass. He was too busy laughing with the same friends who once joined him in mocking me. They sat near the break room, sipping coffee I paid for, under the lights I'd installed. I could see how he puffed his chest, trying to sound important, pretending he ran the place. His words carried pride, but not weight. He didn't know how fragile it all was. And soon he would. By noon, whispers began. I overheard the HR manager talking softly near my door. There had been a mistake, a discrepancy in one of the financial reports his team submitted. I didn't ask questions. I simply listened. My silence had always been my sharpest weapon. At lunch, I sat alone in my office again. I looked out the same window where I once imagined him sitting, strong, wise, continuing what I built. Instead, I watched him flounder, drowning in arrogance he thought was confidence. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, it happened. His laughter stopped. The manager, who had been laughing with him earlier, walked up to his desk holding a printed report. Her tone had changed. Her smile was gone. Within minutes, the mood shifted. The same people who had once laughed beside him were now backing away, slowly, carefully, as if his downfall might spread like a virus. From my office, I watched him through the glass walls. He looked confused, stammering, trying to explain something. But no one wanted to hear. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. That same arrogance that once echoed across the room was now nothing but a whisper of panic. He ran to HR, trying to clear his name. But they already knew the truth. His friend, the one he trusted, had pinned the entire report mistake on him. And the cameras told the rest. He had signed documents he didn't even read, thinking he was too smart to double-check. A rookie mistake, a costly one. The call came to my office soon after. "Sir," my HR director said, "we have a problem with one of the interns. He's violated company policy. We may need to terminate him immediately," I pretended to think. I even looked at the window again, as though I needed time to decide. But deep inside, I already knew my answer. "Handle it according to the rules," I said. Nothing more. When the meeting ended, I stayed in my chair, motionless. It was strange, and I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. Just a quiet ache where a father's pride used to live. An hour later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Fast, desperate ones. He burst into my office before the assistant could stop him. His eyes were red, his tie loose, his voice trembling. "Dad, please." "You have to help me," he said. The word Dad cracked something inside me. It had been so long since he said it without anger. But I didn't move. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he didn't look proud or defiant. He looked small, lost, human again. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "I trusted the wrong people. They set me up." I leaned back in my chair, my face calm, my heart tired. "Did they?" I asked quietly. "Or did you?" He didn't answer. Tears filled his eyes, but words refused to come. That silence, and the same silence I'd endured all those years, now sat between us. But this time it wasn't my burden. It was his. He lowered his head, unable to hold my gaze. For once his pride was gone, and what replaced it was truth. Raw, humbling truth. I let the silence stretch until it broke him completely. Then I said softly, "Leave your badge at the desk on your way out." He looked up, stunned. "Dad, you can't," but I could. And I did. When he left my office that day, the building felt colder. The echo of the closing door stayed longer than it should have. It lingered in the air like unfinished words, like years of silence pressing against my chest. I didn't move for a while. I just sat there staring at the empty doorway. That was the same door he'd walked through years ago, full of confidence, full of youth. And now he'd left it behind, carrying nothing but regret. Outside my window, the city kept moving. Cars honked. People crossed streets. Life didn't pause for anyone's heartbreak, not even a father's. I looked at the family photo again, the same one that had been sitting on my desk for decades. His mother's smile still glowed in that frame, soft and full of pride. She used to say, "Harold, he's got your fire. Just teach him where to burn." I tried. God knows I tried. But somewhere between growing up and showing off, he forgot that humility is strength too. I closed the drawer, locked it, and stood up slowly. My knees ached, reminders of time and work. But I walked out of that office with my head high, because even though the world had mocked me once through his voice, I knew the truth always finds its way home. When I reached the lobby, I saw him outside, sitting on the steps, his tie in his hands, eyes red and distant. For a moment I stopped. The father in me wanted to comfort him. The man in me knew he had to sit in that pain. His phone kept buzzing, messages from the same friends who'd turned their backs. He didn't answer. He just stared at the screen like maybe it would bring him peace. It didn't. The guards held the door open for me as I stepped out. He looked up and our eyes met. He stood. His lips trembled. "Dad, I didn't mean—" But he couldn't finish the sentence. His voice broke halfway. He wanted forgiveness, but he didn't yet understand the cost of it. I simply nodded once. No words, no anger. Just the truth written in silence. Then I walked past him. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Every tick of the clock reminded me that time takes no sides. I sat in the same chair where his mother used to read her evening devotions. I could almost hear her voice. "You're too soft on him, Harold. One day he'll need to fall before he understands." She'd been right. She always was. The next morning I got a call from the bank. They wanted confirmation about a signature. Mine. A new account had been opened recently under my son's name. It was overdrawn. Apparently he'd tried to invest with some of those same friends who'd betrayed him. Now they'd disappeared and he owed thousands. I listened quietly. The banker spoke carefully, unsure if I knew. When he finished, I simply said, "Don't cover the debt. Let the process handle it," he hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" "It's yes," I said firmly. "I'm sure." After hanging up, I sat there for a long time. Not proud, not angry, just tired. It's a strange feeling watching your own child drown in lessons you once tried to teach him gently. But sometimes pain is the only teacher that gets through. A week passed. No calls, no messages. The house stayed quiet, except for the old clock ticking in the corner. Then one evening, as the sun fell behind the neighborhood rooftops, there was a knock on my door. Not the confident kind, not the impatient kind. It was soft. Almost ashamed, I knew before I opened it. He stood there, thinner, pale, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights. He didn't speak right away. He just stood in silence, holding a small envelope in his hand. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." I looked at him. Really looked. So the arrogance was gone. The pride, the noise, the attitude, all gone. What stood before me wasn't my enemy. It was my son, stripped of every illusion. He held out the envelope. "I sold my car," he said quietly. "It's not enough to pay back everything, but I want to start fixing it." For a moment, my throat tightened, because even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't break, a part of me did. I took the envelope slowly. It was light, almost empty, but it weighed more than gold. Because inside it wasn't just money, it was humility. It was understanding. It was the first step. I didn't say much. Just a simple nod. He wiped his eyes, turned to leave, but before he did, I said quietly, "Son," he stopped. "Next time someone gives you advice," I said, "listen, even if it hurts your pride." He nodded slowly. "I will." And then he left, walking down the same path where I'd once taught him how to ride a bike. Back then, he was fearless. Now he was careful. Maybe that was progress. I closed the door gently. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. The house was quiet again. But this time it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. It was the kind that told me the storm had passed. I sat by the window that night, watching the streetlights flicker across the neighborhood. The same streets I used to walk him down as a boy. He'd hold my hand then, tight, trusting, proud to be my son. And I'd tell him stories about how strength isn't about noise. It's about endurance, about standing still when life tries to break you. Funny how those lessons circle back, because tonight I was still standing. And he was learning to stand again. A week had passed since that last knock on my door. He hadn't returned, but he'd left a letter in the mailbox yesterday. I hadn't opened it until now. The envelope was wrinkled, creased from trembling hands. The handwriting was uneven, but I recognized it instantly. His. I tore it open slowly, letting the paper whisper its way free. The first words hit harder than I expected. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you for not giving up on me, even when you had every right to." I leaned back in my chair, the paper shaking slightly between my fingers. He'd written pages of confession, how the people he'd trusted had vanished, how he'd spent nights alone, thinking about every word he'd ever thrown at me. He said he finally understood what I'd meant when I told him. Years ago, that respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned. And at the end, he'd written one sentence that stayed with me. "I used to think your silence made you weak. Now I know it made you stronger than all of us." I read it again, and again, until the ink blurred with the tears I didn't mean to shed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the old photo frame on the table, the one with his mother smiling. It felt like she was still watching, still guiding. That night I dreamed of her. She was standing in the kitchen, wearing her apron, smiling that knowing smile. She looked at me and said, "You did it, Harold. You let the boy fall, and now he knows how to get up." I woke up before sunrise, feeling lighter than I had in years. I brewed my coffee the old way, slow, steady, and sat outside on the porch watching the world wake up. The air smelled like rain and redemption. Birds sang like they knew something I didn't, and for the first time I didn't feel old. I felt peaceful. I thought about everything, the humiliation in front of my employees, the silence I'd kept when he mocked me, the lessons that only time could teach, and I realized something. I hadn't been punishing him. I'd been preparing him. Life has a strange way of returning truth to where it belongs. The boy who once called me a fool was learning wisdom from the same pain he gave me. And that, I thought, was enough. Later that afternoon, as I walked through the office lobby, the same employees from that day greeted me quietly, respect in their eyes, understanding in their smiles. They'd seen everything. They knew the story, and they knew the kind of man it took to stand tall without shouting. I paused by the front desk, looked out through the glass doors, and saw him across the street, my son, carrying a small briefcase headed toward a new office building. He looked back for a moment, not expecting to see me watching. Our eyes met across the distance. No words, no gestures, just quiet acknowledgement. He nodded once, small, humble, grateful, and that was all I needed. I turned away, hands behind my back, the weight of the years lifting just a little. Maybe one day he'd take over this place again, not as the proud boy who mocked his father, but as the man who learned what silence means. As I walked back to my office, the sunlight streamed through the windows. Landing on the framed photo one more time, I smiled, because now, I finally understood what peace felt like. Not revenge. Not pride, just quiet justice. And that's when I realized, sometimes the best way to teach respect is to let silence do the talking.